Samadhi studio for a book group. And then she came back for Red Bear, and now this is her third book. She's writing her fourth. She's amazing, and we're very excited to hear the conversation that we're going to have tonight, the discussion. Linda Rubin is also with us. Rosen, I'm sorry. You're right. So Linda Rosen is also with us tonight, another author in our circle of authors that we have. And Linda will moderate with Jane. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Jane's daughter, Laura Johnson. She is a regional leader of the emergency department, nurses and PAs for the RWJ Barnabas Health System in the North. She's been an early reader and plot critiquer along with her sister-in-law, Laura Taylor, an OR nurse at Overlook Medical System. The two of them have helped to ensure that the medical content does not stray far from reality. So, Laura.
Well, I feel incredibly lucky to be up here tonight to introduce not just an extraordinary author, but someone. Oh, can you guys all hear me? Yeah, okay. Okay, but let's introduce somebody that I've looked up to my whole life. I might be a little biased, but those of you who have read her work know that her books speak for themselves. Her stories and their characters are not only relatable, but become people you feel like you have always known, as you are easily transported into their worlds. Her ability to bring history to life and her commitment to accuracy gives us a deeper understanding of what life was like in that time, between roles of women in the workforce, how wars were fought, to what limitations were there in healthcare, and also how some incredible safety and surgical advancements came to be. My mother has poured her heart and soul into each of her books, giving them the attention they deserve, even when life's challenges would have made it easier to put it aside. She did it. And that determination Thanks, Mommy. That determination, the refusal to give up and give in when life gets hard, is something that I deeply admire. You set the example for all of us. No matter your age, no matter your health, or the obstacles life throws your way, opportunities are limitless if you have the will to pursue them. My mother began writing at a time in her life when many might have thought it was too late. And yet, here we are, celebrating her work, her dedication, her success. She has truly shown us that there is no too late when it comes to following your passion. I feel so lucky to have the privilege of watching you create these stories that will be remembered for years to come, that will leave your imprint for our family's generations to come, and other reader communities. So, without further ado, it is my absolute honor to introduce to you all my mother, the author of Over There, the person who has inspired me every single day, and the woman who proves that no dream is too big and no challenge is too great to stop you from doing what you love. Please join me in welcoming Jan.
Wow, that was really good. Can I get a copy of that? Before Linda and I get started, I just really want to thank Mount Rich Country Club, all the people who are working here this evening and helping to ensure that the launch of my third book is a wonderful celebration, and it couldn't be any better. So thank you all so much. And I also want to just say that this started out as an opportunity to bring the Mount Rich Country Club Book Club together, and it has grown legs. So thank you for being so hospitable and welcoming friends of mine and the writing community. I really, really appreciate your open arms. Linda is not only a personal friend of mine, but she's a very accomplished historical fiction writer who Association, Writers Association a few years ago. And being both from New Jersey and both down in Florida for part of the winter, we have had an opportunity to really get to know each other and become critique partners. And what that means is that we help each other eyeball material for each other's novels. So we'll read, we'll comment on things that were great, we'll point out things that don't feel right, and parts of the book that are too slow or too fantastical. And so over that period of time, we've really developed a huge mutual respect. So it's really, I'm very fortunate to celebrate tonight with you and have you here doing this interview. We'll get started now.
Okay, let me just take a breath. First of all, I want to say, to have your daughter do that, to introduce you, that is just the most special, really, very special.
I have a great family.
Yes, you do. Okay, so I just want to tell you, this is a phenomenal book. I've been with Jane from, I guess, maybe one of the first words down on the paper on this one.
Thank you.
But her entire series is. But Jane, you have the Gilded City series, and this is the third in the trilogy over there. Just tell us what this one's about, and then kind of bring us into how you came to fit them all in together.
Well, I'll go backwards with your questions. It's called deadlines. When you get a book deal, you're expected to complete the book within a certain time frame. And thanks to the years of working in the healthcare industry and working under a lot of pressure, I'm usually not too intimidated by deadlines, but when you're trying to put a 300 plus book together and you don't know exactly how the plot's gonna travel, it can be a little daunting. So this book takes the characters from threadbare and from In the Hands of Women, the medical characters, and challenges them with a war, being the medical team, part of the medical team that deals with the incredible massive trauma that was occurring from the trench warfare. And they're placed in different locations. And so I felt like my characters had it pretty good in the first and second book. And you know, when you write a series and you have consistent characters, you get to know them really well. You eat with them, you sleep with them, you sometimes have sex with them, for goodness sakes, because you're writing those scenes. Hey, you guys, cover your ears. And, okay, too much information over here. All right, can you please quiet down, peanut gallery? So I wake up thinking about them. I try and think of what am I going to do in this next scene to grab the reader, to make it really interesting to write, and also to lead it into the next following scene. And I felt like they had never been put up against so much adversity for so many months in a row. And war is like that. And for those of you who read The Women, you know that. It just doesn't end. And even if you get a breather here or there, you go back to it. It's like a nightmare that doesn't end. And so I wanted to test their fidelity. I wanted to test their emotional strength. And I wanted to see how they could bear up to some of the new innovations that they were having an opportunity to experience. Like, for example, facial surgery. Dr. Gillies from New Zealand through England was the father of plastic surgery. Literally the father of plastic surgery. And when the war was over, he started doing rhinoplasties because there were shot up faces to fix. And so it evolved into plastic surgery eventually as we know it today. And so many similar innovations happened during World War I that I just found it fascinating to throw my characters into that arena and see how they did.
Okay, and we will talk about the research, but you mentioned everything about the war, but there is so much more about this book with the characters. So just give us your elevator pitch. What is not over there? What is it quickly about?
So the story takes place, it begins in 1917 at one of my characters' weddings. And so the 4 characters who are all written in first person, so I go from chapter to chapter, and each chapter's in a different character's voice. There's 4 of them, 2 women, 2 men. And they're all medical, but they all are together in the first chapter at Miriam's wedding. And they're all thinking about how their hospitals are losing nurses and doctors right and left. Doctors and nurses were not conscripted, they went voluntarily. But by the time the United States entered the war, there was such popularity about supporting it, particularly supporting the American boys who were going over. They didn't want British and French doctors taking care of their own. So the doctors were all tremendous luminaries went, the Mayo brothers went, Cushing went. It was an amazing amount of support that happened. And the 2 men realized that they had to go. Both of them were surgeons. One was older, and he was the chair of surgery at Mount Sinai. The other one was a relatively new surgeon, and he was scared to death to deal with trauma at that speed and pace, and really was worried that he would not be able to do it. The women, so the one who was scared, his name's Eli. Eli's wife, Miriam, who the story mostly focuses around, is a nurse, and she is from Beth Israel, and she wants to go in the worst way, but she keeps getting rejected because she has a leg brace because she had polio 2 years earlier. The first polio outbreak in New York was in 1916, and she caught it because she was a pediatric nurse. So the Red Cross is turning her down, the U.S. Medical Corps is turning her down, and she wants to be there with Eli on his side, working with him. She's a tough knocker, she's smart, and she really feels a duty to go. So that's the setting that kind of all the action grows out of. Then the older doctor ends up going to the American hospital in Paris and working with Dr. Gillis. Eli goes to the front, and Miriam rises in the ranks at Beth Israel until a very peculiar thing happens, and then everything changes. And Hannah, who is the protagonist in The Hands of Women, my main character in that book, has children at home, small children, and she also has Ben's children who lost their mother in a carriage accident years ago, and she's adopted them. And she's dealing with the impact of war on children who are afraid they're never going to see their parent again. And so she's thrust in that arena, and that becomes a story in its own also.
And they are wonderful characters because you meet them in the earlier books, and you watch Hannah grow up, and it's just wonderful. But these books, they are a trilogy, but each one stands alone. So you can start with Over There if you haven't read any of them, or you can start with the beginning. It doesn't matter; they all stand alone. But you do such meticulous research. And it really shows in the writing. Tell us about how you do. Do you just go to Google? Do you read books? Do you interview people?
AI.
What's your method? And my question also, before you start putting words down, do you do months of research, or is it going together?
The part of writing that I really hate is editing. So there's a cycle. And when I get to the end of the book and I revised it, and my editor is ready to accept it and put it in the production line, it still has to be edited several times. And I just can't stand doing that. I have to break it up because I'm not an accountant type by nature. I'm more of a creative, big picture type. So while I'm doing that, I'm begging some of my really good friends who are good at it to take a look. I start researching the next book, so my mind can enjoy part of the writing process. So I started writing over there last fall, and over the summer prior, I was it was 2 falls ago. I was doing research on World War I, and that research was all-consuming because, frankly, I didn't know anything about World War I. I didn't even know why the Americans got into it in the first place. So it was a big black hole in my high school education, and if it was there, it didn't make it into my gray matter. So I wanted to really understand the period of time. I wanted to be able to understand the circumstances politically, what was going on in Europe, what was going on in the medical arena, and so I spent the summer just reading while I was editing. And my process, and it's sometimes incredibly scary, but my process is that as soon as I get the opening scene, and it's usually after I've done enough research that I feel like I know my characters, I know what's going on, and as soon as it forms in my head, that's when I start writing. There's still a ton of research that I have to do, and some of it is not books like the preliminary research. It really becomes checking, what did people have for breakfast in 1917? And when were watches originally worn? By the way, they were worn in the trenches, so that when battles were laid out, the soldiers knew what time to start. So wristwatches became very popular after World War I. But those kind of details I research as I go, because that's not the level that my general research is in. And you too. I mean, you're constantly checking things.
Constantly. But that's the fun of it. That's the whole fun part. So, okay, so while you're editing one book, you're researching and creating, your story's coming to you for the next book. And in your case, you had the characters originally, but not in the first book. They had to be born. So how do you create them? Does each one have a bio? Do you know if they got a birthday present from grandma?
I really let my freak flag fly. I really do. Some writers are very meticulous about outlining. They outline the book, they outline the chapters, they know exactly what they have to do every day to write and complete the project. I have a very loose arc. I know where I'm starting, I know my characters, most of them, although every book I add new characters because it gets later and later in the chronology. But I like to let them come to life in my head and begin to lead me along a little bit. Because once they have a personality, I just don't know what they're going to do 5 chapters later. I have to get there by adding more events and color and texture to the work. And so I trust that process, and it seems to work well for me. I get stuck. I call them traffic circles. I had a big one. My friend Debbie here had to listen to me the other morning. These are my choices. I can go down this road, or I can go down this road with this scene. And traffic circles are places where you're writing and you've just got to make a decision about where the book is going to go next, given where you are and where all your characters are and where the story conflicts are. And so you have options, but those options have consequences later in the book. So you don't want to lose your overall arc if you believe in it. And you need to make sure you can kind of find your way onto that arc. So those are frustrating. They sometimes get solved in the shower. Literally, I have come up with solutions. I have woken up and I'll turn to David and I'll say, I figured it out. I know what this character needs to do. I'll be in like semi-sleep thinking about these characters, and all of a sudden it'll come. It's like the relaxed mind has more open doors. And sometimes, if I'm really stuck, I'll go out for a walk alone and just think about the story. And something about exercise and the change of venue sometimes opens up. Do you find that too?
Yeah, and it's always when you don't have a pencil and paper near you.
Oh, I never forget stuff like that. Do you remember?
Yeah, you do. And actually, when you're thinking of it, and the whole dialogue goes in your head, and then you go to sit down and type it up, it really comes out better the next time.
Oh yeah, well, everything you write goes through multiple revisions. I mean, no author gets it right on the first draft.
None, not even Stephen King.
And not even Ann Patchett.
No, not at all. But I love the traffic circle. And I know myself when I've been in book clubs and you hear that an author says, the character told me what to do, and I thought that was absolutely the most ridiculous thing I'd ever heard until I started writing. So when you're going around your traffic circle and you think you're taking the first right, have you ever had a character tell you, nope, I'm going to the third one?
You know, this is great, and I had an example of this this week. And my sister Ann will appreciate this, because whenever I need humor in my books, I channel my father. My father was a very esoteric, unusual guy, full of all kinds of emotional complexity. But one thing he had was an amazing sense of humor, and he was like good on the spot. And it was a scene that I'm writing now in the book, the fourth book, which goes to the beginning of the Borscht Belt. And my character is taking care of a teenage boy who had his hand caught in a farm thresher. And because of the medical expertise in the family from World War I, the boy is taken to their clinic and they work on him. And then he can't be moved. So they take turns staying with him overnight. And at one point, it was during Prohibition, so we had Dutch Schultz in the story, and the KKK was up in Sullivan County, believe it or not. Anyway, so this boy is from the KKK world, ironically. And so this character, my main character, is like getting him ready to be transferred to the hospital. And she says to him, so what's the story with the KKK? Why are they so vicious? And he starts talking about how they have this idea that the Jewish people have some sort of dark magic connected with them. And she said, oh, you mean they think we have horns and tails, right? And he kind of said, like, yeah. And so she takes his good hand and she rubs it on her scalp and said, do you feel any horns? And he goes, no. And then he smiles for the first time in a week because he's been in terrible pain. And she goes, what's so funny? He said, can I check for a tail now? That was pop. That's right. And so I didn't plan that scene. I didn't know it was coming out, but it was coming to me as fast as I could type. And I thought, this is what I love about writing. I love how organic it can be. And I love how it can pull from all sorts of people in your past life and create scenes that cover the whole myriad of emotions. But in the case of humor, it's always from my father.
And you keep him in your Okay, I want to get into something more serious, but before that, since you brought us to humor, has anything, and it may not have been funny, has anything odd, funny, totally unexpected happened to you while you were researching? I mean, the writing, it just did, that one.
The researching is really fabulous, and that, you know, people hear about this term rabbit holes, that you're researching something and you trip over something you read. And I heard one story that I just loved, that I accidentally found out about it when I was working on the last part of In the Hands of Women, where I had to figure out what Hannah was going to do with money from the state grant. And so I was looking up all this information about the New York City hospitals in 1909, and I discovered that the Bialystoker Synagogue in Lower Manhattan had so many Polish Jews who came to New York up to 1909 that they had to have a hospital for them, a maternity hospital. And, you know, remember, there was no legal birth control. You know, there was no reproductive rights for women at that time. And so these ladies were having a lot of babies. And so Hannah, my protagonist, has to figure out how to address those needs. And they decided they'd raise money for a hospital. So in my research, I discovered that there actually was a hospital that was built then called the Jewish Maternity Hospital, and it was in Lower Manhattan. And it was built by this congregation in conjunction with the city. And so I started like trying to dive in deeper and deeper, and I discovered that it was only open for 20 years. So my hospital friends down there, can you imagine a hospital that was only open 20 years? Crazy. It was bought by Beth Israel, also in Lower Manhattan, during the Depression years, when the hospital couldn't keep its doors open. But the piece of historical trivia that was so fascinating, and it was after my book time periods were over, was that the Jewish Maternity Hospital was turned into a retirement home for rabbis. Interesting, right? Can I share another piece of trivia? So, and over there integrates the story of the American Hospital in Paris. And any of you hear about that hospital, know about it? A couple people, Wendy would know because she's read some of this work. Well, the American Hospital in Paris was opened at the turn of the century, a 36-bed hospital that was built with money from the Vanderbilts and Morgans and Astors, because their children were expats in Paris for a period of time, and they played polo, and they'd get hurt, and they didn't want them going to a French hospital. So they built a hospital for them, and it was very small and located in the heart of Paris. And by the time the war started in 1914, the same families, together with the Red Cross, raised money and turned it into an 800-bed hospital. By the time the Americans got into the war, in 1917, it was 2,000 beds. So in less than 17 years, it went from 36 beds to 2,000. I mean, for anybody who's worked in healthcare, you can't even begin to think how impossible that is. They bought up boys' schools, one school that was just about to open down the block that was a boarding school, so it had all the bedrooms, so they instantly had patient rooms. And so they just kept up buying property. And now I think the hospital's about 400 beds in today's time. It's still open, but it was such a fascinating story that I was just blown away by how in crisis you can do things so fast.
Okay, so your other characters, and you're talking a lot about war because the book is centered around the war. But there's so much in this book that brings in love and family. And this is what grabbed me. It was the cost of the war, not only on the soldiers, but on the people at home, on the kids. What made you, what was that little nugget that made you want to write about that?
Well, I always wondered how war affected families, because it's so nightmarish. And for adults, it's like a living nightmare. I can't even imagine what it'd be like to have your parent leave the house to go fight a war. And I don't know if any of you had fathers or mothers who went to Vietnam, but that's the only one in the recent past I can think of in my lifetime. But this was pretty common during World War I and World War II, is to have a parent leave and go to battle. And it was really the adolescent son, Albert, who caught my attention. Albert in the story is Ben's son. He's 14, he's already lost a mother, and now he's been adopted by Hannah, who's a terrific stepmom. But his father, who he's really connected with, especially as an adolescent, is now gone. And the boys in the school are fighting each other tooth and nail. Because Albert's father's a doctor and their fathers are in the trenches, they're calling Albert's father a coward. And so Albert is really acting out. And Hannah doesn't know what to do. She's never raised boys. And he's really a bucking bronco. And so it gave me the opportunity to tie in the farm again. And so they go to the farm in the summer, and you gotta remember the Spanish flu broke out in 1918. So this is right in the middle of the time that the Americans were over there. And so it just gets like really involved. And she's worried about the flu coming back to New York and protecting the children. So she takes them to the farm, and the family is just so wonderful. The uncle who now runs the farm has a neighbor who's training war horses. And I don't want to spoil the book for you guys, but I thought the whole idea of boys training horses for particularly a child who's acting out, what a good even playing field for a boy who's rambunctious to have a wild animal who has to be tamed. And he loved it. And it leads into the next book, and Albert's one of the main characters in the fourth book. And so I just thought it was such a nice opportunity. It also, as a writer, it took out some of the intensity of the battlefield. Because it was a blood-free battlefield dealing with the boys and the children, it kind of changed the story to an easier one to connect with, a little bit of a break. And most writers who write suspense stories, they have to put in chapters to give their readers a break, or else you're gonna have a heart attack by the time you finish the book. So they've gotta respect the fact that the reader needs relief. So I felt like that worked in the book for me.
It works very well. Okay, so that wasn't bloody battles when we're back here in the States, but there were so many battles within the family and Albert within himself and in school. But then you did bring in the blood when we were over there.
Oh, yeah.
And the surgery. When you read this book, you're going to think she was performing the surgery or she watched the surgery getting performed. How did you research that you got it so vividly?
Well, I said I had a remarkable family, and I wasn't kidding. Having all of my children in medicine and a daughter-in-law who works in an operating room, I had real good opportunity to fact check while I was writing. I also did a lot of research on anatomy, so I understood where the nerves were, what they were called, and I've always had a fascination with medical innovation, so this for me was really interesting. Just for those of you who probably may not know more than I knew about World War I when I started writing, the medical innovations in that war were staggering. It was the beginning of using ambulances, and so that whole idea of the golden hour of attacking a trauma, that was maybe not called the golden hour. Debbie, you're a trauma nurse by trade, but they knew that time mattered in terms of saving these boys' lives. So it was the beginning of the ambulance service, and the Americans before we entered the war went over there with the Red Cross, and they brought the ambulance service with them. Originally, it was with horses. By the end of the war, every ambulance was motorized. So it was speed. They had X-ray machines at the battlefield, so they could deal with the damage from machine guns, because little particles called shrapnel would get all over the body, and there was no way to find it all without X-ray. So they had an opportunity to do that. There was the beginning of using blood transfusions right at the battlefield. So all of these things were new in war, and for people who were coming from the United States and working in the thick of it, their skill sets just blew up. They learned so much and brought back so many new skills to the United States when they got home. And then, of course, there were advances in anesthetics and antiseptics, but I don't spend a lot of time on all that detail. But trust me, it was an amazing period of medical innovation. Without penicillin yet. No penicillin yet.
Right. Well, you may not spend a lot of time on the detail of anesthetics, but the detail in there would make you feel that you did the surgery yourself. Okay, let me introduce you. We have Hannah and Miriam, who, by the way, is my favorite character in the book. And Eli and Ben, and of course Albert and his sister, whatever. Who was the most difficult for you to write?
I think it was Eli. Miriam's my favorite character too. I love writing unpredictable women characters. You know, I just think they're wonderful because they're so spunky. But Eli, I had to get my head into a man's point of view, into a surgeon's point of view, who was used to moving at a certain speed in a very controlled environment in his hospital in New York, where he operated. He was a great surgeon, but he operated on one patient at a time, with all sorts of helpers. If a trauma came in through the emergency department, he had a team of people racing to his side to help. And he's going from that to bare bones at the operating table after triaging a whole bunch of soldiers coming in the door, some going to the pile of corpses with morphine to take them out of pain because they're unsalvageable. Some where they're just have unbelievable facial and head wounds, and there's someone in the team who's handling that. And his job, because of who he meets along the way, is to work on salvaging limbs, because the number of amputations during the war was phenomenal. And they believed, this group of people who dealt with the antiseptics, that felt that a lot of those arms and legs could be saved, and these boys could go home with all 4 appendages. And so that becomes his focus, and he gets really good at it. And so taking him from his insecurities, putting him in this incredible trauma situation, having him master the skills, but then break down in other ways. And I'm not going to share what they are, but he he does have a breakdown of sorts. Having that happen was really tricky because I didn't want the reader to lose their sense of compassion for him. And it's really easy to do that when boys misbehave. So it was very, very careful writing and really getting into his head and his heart to get through that. And it was complex for me.
It must have been very difficult because you had to make him sympathetic because he really was a bad boy.
Yes. Yes. Poor Eli.
Yeah.
I have a couple of people in the audience who didn't want me to go in that direction, but I knew I had to. I mean, there's just so much misbehavior that goes on in wartime, and to avoid it is to sterilize the story, and I didn't want to sterilize it.
It's not. You feel the sweat and you feel the dirt. I mean, even in Manhattan too. I mean, you do feel the grit downtown. You feel the difference between downtown and uptown. You get that so well with your wording and your images. When you first started writing, you had an idea that came to you, and actually In the Hands came out. Did you plan on a trilogy when you wrote that book?
No. No, I had written Threadbare first, but it's junk, and I didn't want to take it to show anybody. So I asked my writing coach, oh God, what do I do next? And she said, just start writing the next book. And so I really wanted to write a book about Hannah, and it just flew out of me. In the Hands of Women was one of those books that really grew organically. Most of the story wasn't planned ahead, and I did a lot of reshuffling and recasting to make it work, but that book and the things that happened to Hannah, I just kept thinking, what am I going to do to this girl next? And went from one scene to the next. And what was your question?
Did you plan on a trilogy?
No. So what happened was I presented In the Hands of Women first and was given a 2-book deal. So I knew I had to rewrite Threadbare because Threadbare was really the prequel. And Threadbare is the book that's really most personal to me because it's about my great-grandmother's story. And most of that is fictional, but it's really an ode to her and to women who died of cancer before the 1900s. And what they must have gone through, especially dying young and having their names forgotten, like Tilly's name. And I had to really dig around to find her name in Ancestry. But when In the Hands started selling, it took off in the market that I sell in the small press market. And so they immediately offered me a second 2-book deal. And at first I worried a lot about my health because I live with cancer. And I thought, well, I don't know if I'm going to be around to write 2 more books. But I'm almost done with the second one of those 2, and that will make the 4th book. So you never know. I don't know what I'll do after that, though.
It'll come. So, okay, if I get it right, the idea, you were writing Threadbare, which you thought was a bunch of garbage, and pushed it aside. So that idea, that nugget, was your grandmother.
Great-grandmother.
Your great-grandmother. And that's what set that one off. So then you just fell in love with a character and wrote her story, and then went back. So really the nugget for the whole trilogy was your great-grandmother.
That's Matilda, yeah.
Matilda, who becomes Tilly. Okay, so you have 3 wonderful books. The 4th one's going to come out.
Next June.
Once she gets it done.
It's actually, I was at a program for the Junior League, and there was another author there who had told me that she counted pages per day, per week, and I thought, oh my God, that's really OCD. now she has me doing it, and I even have an Excel sheet, and I project how many pages a week if I do one extra one, and I really wish she never said that, because I'm like really obsessed now. I'm up to page 176.
Okay, you got at least 100 or
Who's
more to
counting,
go.
right? Who's counting?
Okay, well, we want to open this to questions, but my last one is, what would you like readers to take away from your books, especially from over there, because that's when we're celebrating tonight?
Well, I think that the one thing, particularly in light of what's going on today in our world, where we have so much disagreement and we don't see eye to eye and we have issues with immigrants, is that when I look at the history of the people in my story, which are Jewish people living in Lower Manhattan, next door to Italian people, to Polish people, to Greek people, to other Slav countries, that they all went through a similar experience. And through their perseverance in the United States, we developed this incredible tapestry that we call America. And it is a real marvel to me to think about it that way, and I don't want to see it undone. I don't want to see people, for ridiculous reasons, hating each other. I think that just is so disturbing. And we couldn't have done it without the experiences that we shared together. Here's just one more fact that I found really surprising when I was researching over there. At the time of World War I, 3% of the population was Jewish, but yet 6% of the army was. And when I look at the Italian population, it's almost triple. And so I started putting a grid together, going ethnic group by ethnic group, of people who immigrated to the United States during the late 1800s, early 1900s. Now, the government was spending a lot of money taking care of them. They weren't citizens, they were illegals. There were no illegals and legals, they were all illegal, really. And educating them in the school, and the social services were enormous, and yet they weren't citizens, so they couldn't be drafted. So they created an accelerated pathway to citizenship if they signed up, and it extended to their families. So the amount of immigrants who signed up during World War I was staggering. It was so high that they had to have special training camps located in the United States to first teach them English, because many of them did not speak English, and they couldn't go into the trenches without understanding commands. I mean, there's this dark side of humor that kind of surfaces in me when I think about that. But the truth of the matter is that they filled a good part of the army with people who were so grateful to be safe in the United States, to be working, to be away from the adversities that they were dealing with from their native countries, that they were willing to fight for America. And I think that's remarkable. I don't know that we see that today, but it is remarkable. And so I really look at where we are today and the mixture of different ethnicities, even in this room, and I think to myself, how could we not all respect each other? I mean, you'd have to really be off in another land emotionally to be that equal. So that's what I'd like people to take away.
Should we open for questions? Should we open for questions?
Yeah, we have a few minutes for questions. Nothing hard. Barry Vector.
So I had a question. How is Miriam related to Hannah?
Miriam is, Hannah is Miriam's aunt. So Miriam is Tilly's younger child. And as a matter of fact, in Threadbare, Hannah helps deliver Miriam when Tilly gives birth.
So you really meet these characters all along. How do
Yeah.
we go from their birth?
And this book has a family tree. So I had a lot of readers say, I'm getting confused with the characters. Couldn't you make a family tree? And I said, of course I can. So I had a family tree person help me make up a family tree. So it's right in the front of the book. Yes, Dale.
So I have a simple question. I have a new friend at the club, and she wants to know where to start. She heard I was coming tonight, I was telling her that I had books. Which one should she read first?
Oh, which book should you read first? I mean, if you're a stickler for chronology, you read Threadbare first, because it goes back to the 1880s, and then In the Hands of Women picks up in 1900, and Over There picks up in 1917. So if you care, but you could read any of the books in any order. I try not to have a lot of giveaways.
Anybody else?
Barbara.
So as you get closer to the modern era, do you find it harder to know whether something is an innovation or assuming that it was there already? Like, you have to do this research, like wristwatches were created at this time. So how do you know which things you have to research and which things you can assume were there?
If I'm not sure, I check it.
Gotta research everything.
I check expressions, I check foods, I check everything. I had to, in Albert Becomes a Pharmacist, I had to do a deep dive into what pharmacists had in their pharmacies and how much compounding they did in 1924. Everything you research. You don't, if you're going to be a credible historical fiction writer, you can't make mistakes about stuff like that. But if you do them intentionally, because after all it is fiction, and sometimes the timeline doesn't work perfectly, you need to footnote it in the back in your author notes. I changed the name of Butterick in Threadbare because they were the villains, and I loved Butterick patterns as a kid sewing. So I had to change the name. I didn't want to make it seem like maybe that could have been true. Wendy.
I was going to ask, is your audience mostly Jewish readers, and have you heard anything anti-Semitic from people in response to your books?
My audience is over half Jewish,
Is what?
and I have never heard anything anti-Semitic. And if I did, if I heard anything, any opposition to any ethnic group, I would respond the exact same way. But I find that a reading audience generally is open-minded, and they're reading to learn and absorb and be entertained. And they're special people. Readers are special people. And so I have not, but my books do appeal to the Jewish community pretty heavily. But I do think that Over There, this one I hope to bring in the men, because the men fought the war, the men were hurt, and two of my main characters are male. So I just really hope more men read the book. Wendy.
Have you had to search for special libraries or special archives in order to be able to do any of your research? And if so, which have you had to discover?
Yes and no. I did a lot of research on New York City initially when I was writing Threadbare, and I spent time, the library that I loved going into was the New York Historical Library, and they pulled out grid maps of Upper Manhattan, and I actually found where the farm was. I mean, that was pretty cool. And the maps were done because so many structures in the 1800s were still wood, and they were done by the insurance companies because of which buildings were more fire hazards, because you gotta remember that they didn't have electricity, they were using a lot of fire to still cook. And so the insurance companies were very involved in the building construction and so forth. And really by the turn of the century, there were ordinances that prohibited any more wooden buildings, which was interesting. Any more questions?
So I wonder, do you ever have re-entry issues when you do a deep dive into writing historical fiction?
Do I ever have what issues?
Re-entry issues.
Re-entry. I have re-entry issues without writing. I have re-entry issues when I wake up in the morning. Yes, I spend so much time in my head that I'm not sure from a mental health standpoint it's good. I really do. My characters are they're like real people to me. And I love them, and some of them I hate. And I have to let it go. I mean, I'm not that bad. David, do I carry it with me all day? He's not gonna answer. He's a politician. I really try not to. And in the beginning when I was writing, I talked about the books a lot. I don't talk about them quite as much as I used to. Ben, Laura, am I still that bad?
You're allowed to talk to me.
Well, Laura's different, because Laura's an early reader, so she's very involved in plot. But then, do I talk about it a lot? I think I'm better.
That's why we find our community and we can talk to each other about
Yeah,
it.
'cause
instead
we're all
other
kind of
family and
crazy.
friends. I meant to ask you this and I forgot. So you wrote, your 4 main characters, 2 women, 2 men. I mean, you were talking about how difficult it was to write Eli. It's difficult for a woman to write in a man's voice. Or
Well-
did you not find that?
No, I didn't find that, and I think it's because of my background working in healthcare, and there's so many men, and particularly surgeons. And so my characters are surgeons, and so I spent hours and hours dealing with them. And I say dealing with them, because sometimes they were very much like big children. But they were incredibly smart, and I learned so much from them also. And I didn't really have trouble finding their voice, but with Eli, it was more his personal story arc
Right.
that I struggled with, because I liked him, and then I didn't like him. And it's really hard to write compassionately about someone you don't like. So it was challenging. Before we go any further, I just have to say, this has been the most fun launch. And I want to thank every single person here for coming. You have absolutely made my year. I mean, this just feels so great. So, authors spend a lot of time by ourselves. We really burrow in. It's just we and our cup of coffee or tea and our computer. And sometimes when I come out of it, I really feel like a loner. And so having this people juice is really nice. Any more questions?
Did you get to go to
Yes.
Did you get to go to Paris?
What?
Did you get to go to Paris?
I've been to Paris, but I haven't been, okay, so that's actually a really good question. I was all set. We took a cruise a few weeks ago around Spain, and it was lovely. But we were supposed to fly into Paris because I wanted to go see the trenches. And you can take a tour of them. A lot of them are still there. And there's a museum, a World War I museum. And I wanted to do all that and then fly down to Barcelona and get on the cruise. But in November, I got some really scary news about my health. And it looked like I might not even make it to the cruise. And obviously, I look like I'm pretty healthy right now, right? They put me in a new drug. And once again, after 16 years of being on one drug after another, it's working. Now, I don't know how long it's going to work for, but when we were booking the trip, I said, maybe we shouldn't do the Paris the American hospital in the trenches. Let's go take the cruise. It'll be relaxing. If I'm not feeling well, I can rest. And so we had a good time, but there's part of me that really wants to see those trenches. Wendy?
I just want to share one personal note, and that is that in the 1980s, my sister had her leg shattered in Paris.
Do you want to give her the mic?
My sister in the 1980s had her leg shattered in Paris when she was hit by a motorcycle. And they put her back together at the American Hospital in Paris. So
Wow.
good call on that hospital.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the hospital is owned and run by the French now,
Yeah,
but that's really cool.
Yeah. I had a connection to that.
So I hope you enjoy reading this third book. And as every author hopes and prays, if you enjoy the book, that you take a moment to put a rating on Amazon and Goodreads. We are measured by ratings and book sales, and it's just so easy to finish a book, enjoy it, and then go on to the next book you're reading. Stop for a moment and do the author a favor and put a rating up, because, I mean, you know, I do it, I always do it now, and I read about 3 books a month. And I always put up ratings now, because I know what it feels like to have to beg people to put up ratings. So I hope you enjoy the book, and look for Hat Trick next spring. And thank you.